Hi and welcome to Writing with Steve. This is the second video on poetry, and if you haven't seen the first video, please check that out. Today we're going to look at two of the most common poetic forms. We're going to look at the haiku and we're going to look at the Shakespearean sonnet. Haikus are great fun. They're great fun because they are relatively short. Okay, relatively, they're really short. In fact, they are 17 syllables long. Yeah, you heard right, just 17 syllables long. Also, they follow a pattern and a routine, a rule. So by following them, it's a great opportunity to create a pattern in your poetry writing and something that's pretty short. And it does, because you're limited to 17 syllables, it does make you have to make some decisions when it comes to honing and crafting and editing your poem until you're left with the most important words. A haiku is minimalist poetry writing that packs a big punch. So we're going to have a look at what the haiku is. So those of you who may be unfamiliar with a syllable, so when I'm talking about syllables and we're limited to 17 syllables, just a quick recap. A syllable is a unit of sound. We place syllables together to form words. So my name is Stephen, and that is formed through two syllables, ste and ven. So Stephen, two syllables. Carol, who's behind the camera, hi Carol, again two syllables are forming her name. Telephone is comprised of three syllables, telephone. Okay, so we're working with 17 syllables. So what is a haiku? Well, a haiku is a Japanese poem. So that's where it originates from. And there are various definitions of a haiku, which we're not going to get bogged down or hung up about. In its traditional sense, as in the way that other people are using the haiku now, because it's used worldwide, it's got worldwide application and it's really popular, we usually follow a pattern of 17 syllables broken down to a pattern of 3 lines, and on each line we have 5 syllable, 7 syllables and 5 syllables, all equaling 17 syllables. Some people, some purists, will tell you that the haiku subject matter is usually nature. It usually starts with a reference to a natural feature or to a season of the year, and then it leads to the final line, which has an impact. So it has some kind of profound message or something that is lasting based upon an observation by the poetry writer. I'll give you some examples from some of the grand masters of haiku writing from Japan, and just show you how simple and relatively simple they are to write. But to write well, of course, will take you a great amount of time and effort if we can reach the standards of some of these haikus that we're going to look at. I've already made a mistake because I've just called them haikus, which is probably the equivalent of saying sheeps. So it's a form like sheep, it's haiku singular, haiku plural as well. So here are some classic haiku, and you may notice that in translation the syllables used don't quite add up to 17, and you may also notice that they don't always follow the 5-7-5 rule. An old silent pond, a frog jumps into the pond, splash, silence again. Autumn moonlight, a worm digs silently into the chestnut. A summer river being crossed, how pleasing, with sandals in my hands. Night and once again, the while I wait for you, cold wind turns into rain. The lamp once out, cool stars enter the window frame. And here's a haiku from Carolina.
Brown and melted butter on it, sweet happiness, why you burnt now?
But although the traditional haiku are written about nature, that doesn't limit you to writing about nature either, as Carol's haiku demonstrates. What we also have is a category of haiku called human haiku, which can be about anything. It could be about your fridge freezer, it could be about the toaster, it could be about relationships or your mobile phone. So you are not limited by writing just about one category. Here is one of mine. It's called Buxton Ice Haiku. Dark ice on hillside, a couple link arms as one, caution in each step. And when you get a taste for them and you've practiced them a little and feel confident writing haiku, why not create your own haiku pattern and rules? So for example, employing 19 syllables or 24 syllables, or sticking to 3 or 4 lines. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is that you are creating a structure and a framework for your poems. In my last video, I did say that it didn't matter if you did follow any particular poetic form, and you can still adapt, like I've just mentioned with the haiku. You can adapt a particular form or style to your own needs. What is good about writing to a particular form or format is that it does focus your mind and your attention to the words that you're using. It does create a particular formality, and particular forms of poems suit particular poems as well. So for example, although you don't have to follow haiku religiously, but they do suit really short observations, which is really good if you're writing from your notebook and observations that are going into your journal. Also, they're really good for observations on nature, the changing seasons and time, and relationships. And we are now going to look at a very formal type of poem, which is the sonnet. There are different types of sonnets, but a great place to start is the Shakespearean sonnet. And we'll look at a really famous sonnet, which is Sonnet 18, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Some time too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Okay, so that's a splendid sonnet, but let's unpack it and let's look at the structure and the conventions of a Shakespearean sonnet. So we can divide the 14 lines, you've probably already noticed it was 14 lines in length. We can divide this into 2 sections. The first 8 lines is known as the octet. Oct, as we know, meaning 8. The remaining 6 lines is known as the sestet. So why does the poet divide the poem into 2 sections? Well, the very first 8 lines is usually a problem, an issue, or something that the poet is contemplating and thinking about. Something that's on the speaker's mind. So in the first 8 lines, the speaker is contemplating the shortness of life and how time ravages beauty and youth. And he's asking, is anything ever permanent in life? The final 6 lines are usually the resolution to that concern that's on the poet or the speaker's mind. And in Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, the poet has a solution, and he finds that poetry and writing these lines about his lover is giving to her an immortality of sorts, that her beauty and their love is being preserved in the poem. To drive the point home, Shakespeare often finishes the sonnet with 2 lines that rhyme, what we call a rhyming couplet. So sometimes it's really interesting to look at the techniques being used, but it's far more important to consider the reasons why these techniques are being used, because we can pinpoint that there's a rhyming couplet at the end, but it's much better to think as poets and as writers and to consider why the writer is using the rhyming couplets. And of course it is to pack a punch, because those ideas are distilled in those 2 lines at the very end. So for example, this sonnet ends with, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. We can see now the reason for breaking the sonnet into 2 halves. We have the problem, then we have the resolution. The poet often signals the change between concern and resolution by the start of the sestet, which of course is the 9th line. This is often done by using words like but, hence, and we call this the volta or turning point. So in this poem, the volta does occur on line 9. He says, but thy eternal summer shall not fade. A sonnet lends itself to a very formal yet intimate style, where you can almost hear the poet addressing or speaking to the subject of his poem. So it makes for really intimate reading, and added to it is the use of the word thee, thy or you as well. To add to the formality of the sonnet, the poet usually employs a rhyming pattern. The Shakespearean rhyming pattern for the sonnet is the following: A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. So, to recap, the first 8 lines of a sonnet, what is it called? And the remaining 6 lines, what is that called? What's the name that we give to the final 2 lines which rhyme? And what's the word that begins with V for the turnaround in the sonnet? So far so good. And the final part of the sonnet is how conversational the poem reads. As you read it out loud, you will soon realise that this is just like spoken sentences. How does he achieve that? So one of the techniques the poet is using, particularly in the Shakespearean sonnet, is the use of 10 syllables in a line. So syllables are really important, those units of sound. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So we really have these 10 syllables. Thou art more lovely and more temperate. So let's just check. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. So we have these 10 syllables per line, what is known as iambic pentameter. Not only are we using these 10 syllables, but notice how the poet makes the stress land on the first syllable, the third syllable, missing one syllable out, third. So let's just have a go. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? You should find that pattern with the stresses being used that way again gives the poem movement. It drives the rhythm forward. It gives it that kind of di-da, di-da, di-da sound or rhythm, which again is really useful, and it drives the poem. It gives it lots of energy. It gives it lots of force. But again, that's a feature. Why is it being used? That's really the important question. And it's being used because iambic pentameter is the nearest simulation to the rhythm of natural speech. It mimics the way we speak. So by using iambic pentameter, we can actually hear a conversation between the poet and the subject of his poem, his lover. So the benefits of using a sonnet is its formality, the fact that it mimics human speech, it makes it very conversational, and it also is very intimate. So a really good poetic form if you're considering writing a love poem. Two other Shakespearean sonnets I would recommend. Sonnet 116, Let me not to marriage of true minds admit impediment, and the very funny 130, My mistress's eyes and nothing like the sun. As I said before, there are different types of sonnet, and people have riffed on the basic format. So for example, there's the Miltonian sonnet as well, which you can check out. From the canon of great sonnets, I would recommend the following. Check out Remember Me by Christina Rossetti, Shelley's Ozymandias, I Being Born a Woman and Distressed by Edna St. Vincent Millay, To Time by Sylvia Plath. If you want to check out the Miltonian sonnet and contrast it with the Shakespearean, read Milton's sonnet on his blindness. So I hope there's lots of great suggestions there, lots of poems and two formats to check out. In our next video, we'll be checking out two more popular poetic forms. If you enjoyed today's video, please subscribe, hit the like button and ring the bell. Ding dong, ding dong. The videos that we are making is covering all aspects of writing, from planning to writing to publishing. Please check out our playlist. If you are writing, for example, any haiku, I would really like to read them, so please share them with us in our comments box. Until next time, from Carol and me, write well.